दर्शकबिन नमस्कार, स्वागत छ यहाँहरूलाई 19औं विश्व संस्कृत सम्मेलन भइरहेको छ नेपालमा। विश्वका करिब 100 वटा राष्ट्रले भाग लिएको छ र यो भागमा करिब 5 दिनसम्म चल्ने सम्मेलनमा नेपालमा भएको छ। विश्वलाई एकजुट बनाउनु पर्छ र यो सम्मेलनले विश्वलाई एकजुट बनाएको छ। संस्कृत सम्मेलनले खास गरी विश्वभर छरिएका वैदिक सनातनी धर्मावलम्बीहरूलाई विशेष गरेर एक बनाएको छ र यो सम्मेलनको उद्देश्य विश्वलाई एकजुट बनाउने खास गरी यसको आयोजक पक्षले जनाएको छ। का विभिन्न देशबाट उहाँहरूको आवाज यस्तो छ, उहाँहरूले यसरी शुभकामना दिनुभएको छ। नेपाल, भारत लगायत जापान लगायत विभिन्न देशबाट आउनेहरूको विशेष भनाइ हामीले उहाँहरूको आवाज राखेका छौँ, अवश्य सुन्नुहोला।
Which is identified as the Akshar Brahm Yoga. And in the 8th Adhyaya, Arjun asks a question. He's been listening to Krishna Bhagavan talk about Brahma throughout the Adhyayas that come before it. And in his mind arises a question, Kim Tat Brahma? This is the first verse. The second verse comes 2 verses afterwards, where Bhagavan answers in very few words. He says, Aksharam Brahma Paramam. That Brahma that you asked about is identified as Akshar. The third verse that I want to talk to you occurs in the 15th Adhyaya, which is identified as Parabrahma Yoga. In this verse, Sri Bhagavan, he's presenting an ontology. He explains Dvavimo Purusho Loke Ksharascha Akshara Evacha Kshara Sarvani Bhutani Kutasto Aksharam Uchyate. In this verse, he describes that there are 2 types of Purush in the world. He says that one is identified as Kshara, the other one is identified as Akshara. And then he qualifies what each is. He says all beings are known as Kshara, whereas the unchanging Kutastha is identified as Akshara. And then 2 verses afterwards, he identifies one other entity. He says, Yasmad Aksharam Atito Oham Aksharadapi Chottamaha Ato Asmin Loke Vedecha Pratita Purushottamaha. Here he makes a transition. He says, we talked about Kshara, we talked about Akshara, but there's this one third entity. And who is that entity? He says, I am superior to Kshara and Akshara. I am therefore renowned in the world and in the Veds as Purushottama. These 4 verses from the Bhagavad Gita identify the Akshar Purushottam Darshan as a separate Vedantic darshan. As we all know, the darshanic landscape includes Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Purva Mimamsa, Uttar Mimamsa. And when you expand Uttar Mimamsa, you have Advait, Vishishadvait, Dvaitadvait, Shuddhadvait, Achintya Vedabhed Darshan, who all give unique understanding of who Brahma is, what's the relationship with an individual with Brahma. These verses identify Akshar Purushottam Darshan as presenting a unique ontology that is distinct from all of these darshans, hence identifying it as the 7th darshan within Uttar Mimamsa or Vedanta. Now, as a darshan that has a distinct entity, within the Vedanta darshans we find that there is a Vedanta commentarial tradition, and specifically a commentarial tradition of the Prasthantraya. 3 texts, the Upanishad, which is known as the Shruti Prasthan, the Bhagavad Gita, which is known as the Smriti Prasthan, and the Brahma Sutra, which is identified as the Tarka Prasthan. Within the tradition, each darshan identifies its readings of these 3 texts and establishes its position, its darshan, as being uniquely identified among the others. As we have already discussed numerous times, Pujyabhadra Swamiji here has written the Swaminarayan Bhashya, which fulfills this purpose. But here I'm here to talk to you about one Bhashya specifically, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita Bhashya. And not even the whole Bhashya, I'm here to talk about one particular verse. And that verse is identified by Bhagavan Swaminarayan in one of his Vachramuts. It's Vachramut Gadra Madhya 9. He quotes the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, verse 240, says, Swalpamasya apyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bayat. And then he gives an interpretation. The Vachramut serves as an interpretive text. He says the meaning of this verse is, if one has even a small amount of Bhagavad Swarup Bar, then it will save one from great fear. He's given an interpretation here. He's interpreted Dharma as being Bhagavad Swarup Bar. What is Bhagavad Swarup Bar according to Bhagavan Swaminarayan? He uses multiple words to describe it. He talks of it using a term called Nishtay. He talks of it using a term called Ekantik Bhakti, Ekantik Dharma, Bhagavad Dharma, Nishtha, Ashro, Upasna. He uses many words to describe this thing. The idea here is there's a core concept, and that concept is expressed in different ways, according to what is being highlighted. When he uses Nishtha, there's an emphasis of it being unmoving. When he uses Nishtha, once again, there's an emphasis of being established. When he uses Ashro, there's an emphasis of seeking refuge that is incorporated in the concept. But what the core concept of Bhagavad Swarup Bar is conviction in the present form of God. And in the Vachramut itself, as Ganantharup Swami mentioned earlier, he mentioned a few Vachramuts very quickly. But in it, within one of the Vachramuts, Bhagavan Swami identifies this core concept as Uttam Nirvikalp Nishchay. And this Uttam Nirvikalp Nishchay is identified as becoming a Brahma Rupa and offering Upasana to Purushottam. That is the conviction. When we look at the Upanishads, and we look specifically in the Mundak Upanishad, we find a mantra in it. Yenaksharam Purusham Veda Satyam Pravacha Tam Tattvato Brahma Vidya. Brahma Vidya is identified as the knowledge by which one understands Akshar and Purushottam. When we look at the Brahma Sutras, we find Athato Brahma Jignasa. Bhadra Swamiji has given a unique identification there. Brahmanoho Jignasa. The Jignasa of two Brahmans, Akshar Brahma and Parabrahma. And so what ultimately happens is that we find that there's a synonymy that exists between Nirvikalp Nishchay, between Brahma Vidya, between Brahma Gnan, and between becoming Aksharup and offering Purushottam Bhakti. That is the meaning of Dharmasya that exists within the verse 240. The Bhashya itself, it identifies Akshara Brahma Guna Sadharma Sampati Purva Parabrahma Swarup Nishtatmak Upasna. This is the definition of Dharma that is given there. It's a form of conviction. And because of this unified form of conviction, when we read the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, we find that the Bhagavad Gita talks about, in the second Adhyaya, talks about Sthita Prajna. In the fifth Adhyaya, it talks about Jivan Mukti. In the sixth Adhyaya, it talks about the Yogi. In the seventh Adhyaya, he talks about the Gnani. In the 12th, Krishna Bhagavan, he talks about Priya Bhakta. And in the 4th Adhyaya, he talks about the Gunatit. All of these come to mean the same thing within this framework. And so we find a unity between these framework, between these identifications. There is one other transition that occurs. In the second Adhyaya, we mentioned the focus is 240. Niyavikrama Nashosti Pratyavaya na Vidyate Salpam Apyasya Dharmasya Trayate Mahato Bayat. But the verse that exists before that, Esha Tevite Sankhye Buddhir Yoge Tunam Shunu Buddhir Yukta Yaya Partha Karma Bandhanam Rahasasi. In the verse before, Krishna Bhagavan does a transition. He says, I've talked up to now about Sankhya, now I'm going to talk about Yoga. In the next verse, he says, this Asya Dharmasya. Asya is a Sarvanama. And as we all know, Sarvanama Buddhista Paramarshitvam. It talks about a topic that is being discussed. This connection identifies Yoga as Dharma. The Yoga that is being conveyed is a synonymy of Dharma. The consequence of this is, when you read the Bhagavad Gita within this framework, you find that the Gita talks about Karma Yoga, the Gita talks about Gnan Yoga, it talks about Bhakti Yoga, it talks about Dhyan Yoga, it talks about Abhyas Yoga, it talks about Sankhya Yoga, it uses Yagna. All of these things have a core concept that is conveyed, which is Pratyaksh Paramatma Swarup Nishtha. It renders a uniform reading of the text. And the final point that I want to convey is, philosophy, we're all philosophers here in some sense. But true philosophy is philosophy when it's practiced. And within the Akshapurushotam Darshan, the consequence of this synonymy between terms, these synonymy between principles, is that whenever someone is engaging Bhakti Yoga, is synonymous to when someone is engaging in Gnan Yoga, is synonymous to when someone is engaged in Yagna. They are all essentially the same, founded on the same concept of what is known as Swarup Nishtha. And so what we find is, throughout these texts, within this, given this interpretation, we find that there is a flow that continues through it, that unifies the teachings that are conveyed in the text. And that is why, that in the Samapti Suchak Vakya, it says, Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su, Upanishad, identifies it as an Upanishad. It uses the words Brahma Vidyayam. It uses the words Yoga Shastra. These are all synonyms. They are all understood as synonyms. And Yoga Shastra, Shri Krishna Arjuna Samade Akshara Brahma Yoga Namo Ashtamo Adhyayaha. And it gives, within this Samapti Suchak Vakya, it conveys this uniformity which is seen through this interpretation. Yidishana.
शांति ब्रह्म शांति सर्वगुण शांति शांतिरेव शांति सामा शांतिरेधि जतो यतः समीहसे ततो नो अभयं कुरु शन्नः कुरु प्रजाभ्यो वयन्नः पशुभ्यः विश्वानि देव सवितर्दुरितानि परासुव जद्वद्रन्तन्न आसुव ॐ शान्ति 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 सुशान्तिर्भवतु सर्वारिष्ट शान्तिर्भवतु तथा च पुरुषोत्तमस्य नारायणस्य दासभावेन उपासना कर्तव्या इति अपि कथितं गढडा मध्य प्रकरणस्य तृतीय वचनामृतस्य अयं सन्दर्भः अस्ति। तदिदं ब्रह्म प्रकृति पुरुषादि सर्वेषाम् अपि कारणम् आधारः तत्सर्वेषु च अंतर्यामी शक्त्या व्यापकं चेति यद् भवेत् कारणम् आधारो व्यापकं च तत्तु न भवेत् कार्यात् पृथक् इत्यभिप्रायम् उद्दिश्य हि शास्त्रं तस्य ब्रह्मणः सर्वरूपत्वम् अनुशास्ति। एतावत् पर्यन्तम् अक्षर ब्रह्मणः निरूपणं भगवता स्वामिनारायणेन कृतं। तदनु परब्रह्मणः निरूपणम् आरभ्यते। अथ तस्मात् ब्रह्मणः पृथक् वर्तते परब्रह्म पुरुषोत्तमो नारायणः स च ब्रह्मणोऽपि कारणम् आधारः प्रेरकश्च। एतावत् पर्यन्तम् अक्षर पुरुषोत्तमयोः ब्रह्म परब्रह्मणोः भेदः दर्शितः। इदानीं तत्पश्चात् साधना उल्लिख्यते। कथम् अस्माभिः साधना कर्तव्या अनुष्ठेया एवं विज्ञाय स्वकीय जीवात्मनः तेन ब्रह्मणा सह एकतां विभाव्य परब्रह्मणः स्वामी सेवक भावेन उपासना अनुष्ठेया। यद् अक्षरम्
इदानीं समागतं पुनश्च वयं शृणुमः पठामश्च अनेकानि भाष्यपुस्तकानि भाष्याणि सन्ति यथा आचार्यशङ्कराणां परन्तु शङ्कराचार्याः अस्माभिः यथा इदानीं दृश्यन्ते न दृष्टाः मध्वाचार्याः तेषां भाष्यमस्ति इदानीं वयं पठामः परन्तु ते अस्माभिः न साक्षात्कृताः पुनश्च रामानुजाः तेषां भाष्यम् अस्माभिः पठ्यते पाठ्यते च परन्तु ते अस्माभिः वृत्तिरूपेण एव विलोक्यन्ते न साक्षात् शरीररूपेण तथैव निम्बार्काचार्याणाम् अपि स्थितिः तथैव अन्येषां सर्वेषां भाष्यम्
whose vision has shaped the intellectual landscape of this global gathering. He has tirelessly worked to foster dialogue between classical Sanskrit wisdom and contemporary academic inquiry. His gracious invitation and support has been pivotal in making this special session possible. Professor Nipani.
शान्तपावनमचिन्त्यवैभवम् तन्नरं बपुसि कुञ्जरं मुखे मन्महे किमपि तुन्दिलं महः। परमश्रद्धेयाः अस्मिन् मञ्चे विराजमानाः महान्तः पण्डिताः विद्वांसः तेषु सर्वप्रथमम् अस्य कार्यक्रमस्य अध्यक्षाः भाष्यकाराः श्रीमन्तः परमश्रद्धेयाः प्रातः स्मरणीयाः भद्रेशदासस्वामिनः, अत्र मञ्चे उपविष्टाः सर्वे अपि कुलपतयः, अत्यन्तं विशिष्टाः विद्वांसः, पुनश्च रामनारायण द्विवेदी उपस्थितानां विद्वज्जनानां अनुमत्या अत्र अहं सर्वप्रथमं वस्तुतः किञ्चित् बिभेमि अहं विदुषां समवायं विलोक्य वाक्यानि अपि बहिः न निस्सरन्ति। तत्र श्री माघमहाकाव्ये नारद आगत्य एकदा वदति भगवन्तं श्रीकृष्णं प्रभो हे भगवन् भवताम् अत्र आविर्भावः पृथिव्याः भारहरणाय जातः, परन्तु इदानीं तु किं मया दृश्यते, भवान् स्वयमेव अखण्ड ब्रह्माण्डानां संग्रहकर्ता अत्र विराजते, नाम अखण्ड अनंत ब्रह्माण्डानां समूह भवति विराजते, एतावता भवान् एव पृथिव्यां भारजायते इदानीम् इति। नाम किं, भवतां यत् गौरवं वर्तते तत् यदर्थं भवताम् आगमनम् अत्र जातं तत् गौरवं तु भवति एव विलोक्यते। तद्वदेव अत्र ये विद्वांसः समुपविष्टाः सन्ति।
अक्षर और पुरुषोत्तम की बड़ी महिमा लिखी गई है। इन दोनों अनादि तत्वों की मूर्ति BAPS के स्थापक शास्त्री जी महाराज ने मंदिरों में प्रतिष्ठित करके भारतीय सनातन तत्वज्ञान को मूर्तिमान कर दिया। इस तत्वज्ञान का व्यापक और गहरा विमर्श अक्षर पुरुषोत्तम के सत्य में होगा। उसके द्वारा संस्कृत और संस्कृति की महान सेवा होगी। इस सत्र के साथ समग्र कॉन्फ्रेंस सफलतापूर्वक संपन्न हो, ऐसे प्रभु प्रार्थना।
That was indeed to inspire seekers worldwide. Let us now receive His divine blessings, sent to all organizers, delegates, support staff, and well-wishers of this conference. Param Pujya Mahan Swami Maharaj, video blessings.
भगवान श्री स्वामीनारायण की चरण धूलि से काठमांडू पार हुआ है। वहाँ 19वीं वर्ल्ड संस्कृत कॉन्फ्रेंस का आयोजन हुआ है। यह जानकर बहुत आनंद हुआ। ऐसे उपक्रम से पूरे विश्व में
नमस्कार। यहाँ विश्व संस्कृति सम्मेलन आज भइरहेको छ। विशेष गरेर हामी विभिन्न देशबाट आउनुहुने विशेष गरेर हाम्रो माताजीसँग यस विषयमा सानो जानकारी। माताजी स्वागत है।
थैंक यू।
ये विश्व सम्मेलन संस्कृति सम्मेलन कैसा लग रहा है आपको? थोड़ा इसकी शुभकामना एक धार्मिक टेलीविजन है हमारा जय बागमती टेलीविजन में, यहाँ का थोड़ा सा आशीर्वाद वचन रखते हैं।
हमारा नाम आशा है, हम केरल से आए हैं। केंद्रीय संस्कृत विश्वविद्यालय के गुरुवायूर परिसर की अध्यापिका हूँ और हम यहाँ विश्व संस्कृत सम्मेलन में एस्थेटिक थेरापी ऐसे एक विषय को लेकर के नई शोध कार्य कैसे चलते हैं इसका इंट्रोड्यूस करने के लिए आए हैं हम लोग। और यहाँ पे बहुत देशों से लोग आए हैं और सब संस्कृत के प्रेमी लोग हैं और एक ही डिसिप्लिन से नहीं, बहुत डिसिप्लिन से बहुत लोग आए हैं और आपस में चर्चा भी चल रहा है। तो इसके बाद बहुत शोध कार्यों में और भी विकास हो जाएगा, ऐसे हमारा प्रतीक्षा चल रहा है और सब अच्छी तरह चल रहे हैं। ऑर्गेनाइजेशन सब कुछ तो अच्छा है। थैंक यू नेपाल फॉर ऑर्गेनाइजिंग दिस कॉन्फ्रेंस इन सच ए गुड मैनर। थैंक यू।
In Kathmandu, visited the sacred shrines of Pashupatinath, Bhagwati and Bhaktapur and miraculously healed King Rana Bahadur Shah of chronic ailments. Deeply moved by Nilkant's spiritual presence, the king of Kathmandu offered him royal patronage. But Nilkant, the renunciate par excellence, humbly declined and continued his divine mission of spiritual upliftment, Kalyan Yatra. However, what Nilkant Varni shared with the kings, pandits, and people of Nepal became the crucible in which the foundational insights of what would later today blossom into the Akshar Purushottam Darshan. So the first seeds of Akshar Purushottam Darshanam were sown here in Nepal. This is a Vedantic tradition that promises moksha through the integrated path of Dharma, Jnana, Vairagya and Mahatmya Jnani Yukta. PS is thankful to the organizers for this gracious invitation. In this session, you will hear scholarly presentations on this remarkable Vedantic tradition. But before we begin, let us invoke the divine prayers to sanctify our pursuit of knowledge. I now invite Pujya Jnantrupta Das Swami to lead us in the sacred Mangalacharan. Pujya Jnantrupta Das Swamiji.
म उत्तम हरियाल मकवानपुर बहुमुखी क्याम्पसबाट यो 19औं संस्कृत विश्व अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सम्मेलनमा म सहभागी भएको छु। अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय ज्ञानको खोजी गर्ने क्रममा संस्कृतमा रहेका नवीनतम ज्ञानहरूलाई अहिलेको परिवेशमा कसरी प्रयोग गर्न सकिन्छ र ती ज्ञानहरूलाई कसरी उजागर गर्न सकिन्छ भन्ने हेतुले भएको यो सम्मेलनको पुनः सफलताको कामना गर्दछु र हामी यस सम्मेलनमा सहभागी हुँदै गर्दाखेरि यो सम्मेलनमा रहेका ज्ञानका विविध क्षेत्रहरूलाई समेट्ने प्रयास गरेका छौँ र यो समग्रमा विद्यार्थीहरूलाई भोलि समाजलाई र समग्र जनमानसलाई चाहिँ मूल शान्तिको प्रभावमा नैतिकताको प्रभावमा बगाउनका लागि संस्कृतले ठूलो भूमिका निर्वाह गरेको छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्दछ। धन्यवाद।
अहं केरलातः आगच्छामि। मम नाम नारायणः। मम द्वितीयवारं भवति अस्मिन् भागभागित्वम्। अत्र आगत्य महती अनुभूतिः वर्तते। अत्र नाट्यथेरापि इति विषये मम प्रभाषणम् अभवत्। अत्र आगत्य अत्रस्थजनानां कृते महान् सन्तोषः वर्तते। सर्वे सात्विकजनाः सन्ति इति महद् आमोदस्थानम् इदम्। अत्रस्थव्यवस्था समीचीना वर्तते। अत्र इतोपि तत्र संस्कृतस्य प्रगतिः इतः परं भविष्यति इति मन्ये। अत्र प्रगतिः भूयात् इति मे प्रार्थना। सर्वेषां शुभकामनाः।
It offers a rich and rigorous contribution to Indian philosophical thought, inviting scholarly engagement with its metaphysics, philosophy, theology, of course Sanskrit linguistic, and spiritual practice. However, as we gather here in Kathmandu, it is very heartwarming to learn that the seeds of this very Akshar Purushottam Darshan were planted here in Nepal. Over 230 years ago, this very land was sanctified by the divine presence of Bhagwan Swaminarayan, then known as Nilkant Varni, who undertook a 7-year arduous spiritual journey through Nepal and India. In Nepal,
अहं विश्व संस्कृत सम्मेलनस्य सहभागित्वेन अत्यन्तं गर्वम् अनुभवामि। एषः सम्मेलनं न केवलं पाण्डित्यपरिषदः अपि तु संस्कृतस्य अस्य अमृतभाषाया जागरूकता विमर्श नवचिन्तनं च एषु सर्वेषु एकं वैश्विकं मञ्चम् अस्ति। प्रतिवर्षम् अहं विश्वसंस्कृतसम्मेलने भागं नेतुमिच्छामि। गत कति वर्षपर्यन्तम् अहं भागं नीतवती। एषः अवसरः अस्मान् प्रेरयतु परम्परा आधुनिकतया च संवादय शास्त्रस्य च यथा समय जीवनस्य च समन्वयाय वाङ्मयस्य च विश्वकल्याणस्य च चिन्तम् अहं करोमि। न केवलम् अहं, वयं सर्वे अत्र आगत्य विश्वस्य कल्याणं प्रार्थनां कुर्मः। सम्मेलनस्य आयोजकेभ्यः विद्यार्थीभ्यः सहभागिभ्यः च अहं हार्दं कृतज्ञतां ज्ञापयामि। भवतु संस्कृतं जगतश्रेष्ठ, भवतु विश्व धर्ममयं। जयतु संस्कृतं, जयतु संस्कृतं।
प्रणामाः। अहं प्रोफेसर महेश फ्रॉम IIT खरगपुर पश्चिमबङ्गतः अस्मि। एकनविंशे विश्वसंस्कृतसम्मेलने अत्र भागग्रहणेन अतीव प्रमुदितः अस्मि। नेपालस्य प्रजाभिः सह मेलनेन, अस्माकं बान्धवैः सह मेलनेन अत्यन्तमुदितमनाः अस्मि। अत्यन्तं सुष्ठुरूपेण, अत्यन्तं चारुरूपेण कार्यक्रमः संयोजितः अस्ति, समायोजितः अस्ति। विना कमपि क्लेशं आवासादिव्यवस्था, भोजनव्यवस्था इत्यादिकम् अत्यन्तं रोचकं। भवद्भ्यः सर्वेभ्यः नेपालजनेभ्यः, नेपालबान्धवेभ्यः अस्माकं शुभकामनाः। जयतु संस्कृतं, जयतु भारतं, जयतु नेपालराष्ट्रं। सर्वेभ्यः धन्यवादः।
ल, जय श्री राधे। आज हामी अत्यन्त दिव्य क्षणमा छौँ, दिव्य स्थानमा छौँ। यहाँ 19औं विश्व संस्कृत सम्मेलन भइरहेको छ। यहाँ देश तथा विदेशका सम्पूर्ण 100वटा लगभग 100वटा देशका व्यक्तिहरू आएर यो संस्कृत सम्मेलनमा उपस्थित हुनुभएको छ। यो अत्यन्त हाम्रो गौरवको विषय। यो संस्कृतप्रतिको यो आस्था हो। हामी नेपालमै भएर पनि हामी हिन्दू धर्ममा लागेका व्यक्तिहरू पनि यति हामीले उत्सुकताका साथमा हामीले यसलाई हामीले लिएका छैनौँ। तर पनि देश विदेशहरूबाट अनेकौँ देशबाट यहाँ यो विश्व संस्कृत सम्मेलनमा आएर भाग लिएर यहाँ अनेक प्रकारका परिचर्चाहरू भइरहेका छन्। यहाँ संस्कृतलाई कसरी चाहिँ अगाडि बढाउन सकिन्छ भन्ने विषयमा यहाँ चर्चा भइरहेका छन् र यहाँ अनेक प्रकारका संस्कृत सम्बन्धी पुस्तकहरू पनि हामीले प्राप्त गर्न सक्दछौँ भने यस्तो अत्यन्त 19औं यो विश्व संस्कृत सम्मेलनमा सहभागी हजुरहरू पनि हुन सक्नुहुन्छ, आएर सहभागी हुन सक्नुहुन्छ र यो अत्यन्त ठुलो क्षणमा हामीले अत्यन्त शुभकामना दिनुपर्दछ। यस्ता कार्यक्रमहरू फेरि पनि भइराखुन् र हामी पनि सहभागी हुनुपर्दछ भन्दै म बिदा हुन चाहन्छु। जय श्री राधे।
Sorry, again. I came from Japan.
What is your name?
My name is Seiichiro Aoki.
How do you feel about to participate in this conference?
This is the first time to attend a Sanskrit conference, and so very valuable knowledge for me. I much learn about Sanskrit related things.
Do you know Sanskrit language?
No, no.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi. これは何ですか?
これは何ですか? What is this?
What is your name?
私の名前? My name is Mami Umemoto. Mami.
Where are you from?
Japan, in Kyoto. Do you know Kyoto?
Yeah, I know. How do you feel to participate in this program?
This is a lot of people in the conference conversation. So many ideas put in my heart.
Do you know the Sanskrit
No,
language?
no. I don't know.
How you stay in Nepal?
This is powerful.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.